Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Sue Edmonson. Looking forward to our conversation today, Sue.
Thank you.
Yeah. We haven't had any Brits on for a while, so it's great to have
All right.
Yeah. So healing. What does healing mean to you, Sue?
Doing things that'll help me feel better, to work out a lot of pain and anger. And for me, it's without affecting anyone else. To me, there's no point dumping your pain on someone else if they don't know what to do with it. So stuff I can do on my own.
Stuff you can do on your own.
Or with a group, like a yoga class, where it isn't intrusive, where they're not asking questions.
Yeah. Because we see so much of that leaking, don't we? Like we're leaking our anger and it's impacting other people, and we don't want that to happen. So we want we want more harmony on the inside. So we're kind of like more harmony on the outside, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's been my experience that however well-meaning other people are, if it hasn't happened to them, they just don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. And what that causes us some frustration, I guess, as adoptees. How would you sum it up? That's the effect of that on you?
Well, I've learned just to keep my mouth shut. I don't tell many people I'm adopted unless it's appropriate or unless they feel, I feel there's some inclination,
Yeah. So have you learned that the hard way by kind of like oversharing, talking too much about it, and then realizing, or have you always?
I mean, most people are okay. Let's, be clear on that. And I'm not talking about now. I'm talking about years ago, school and, early employment, that sort of thing. I wouldn't say it was so much oversharing. It's just if I've mentioned it, because they don't understand it, being weaponized, everything stops there because I'm adopted. And they can do what they like, but it's all my fault because I'm adopted and I've had all these problems. And I think, well, I'm just as good as you lot. I don't want it weaponized. I don't want it used against me by people who didn't understand the situation. I mean, I'm not talking about now. It's completely different. I mean, as a society, we know far more now about child development than people did in the 50s and 60s. And as a child, well, not as a little child, but from 7 onwards, I think, home was not good. We were on a downward slope. And I really didn't appreciate being told how lucky I was and how wonderful the parents are. I mean, I think with most adoptees, you mention your adoption and it becomes about the parents. And we were living in a mess and I didn't want them to know and I didn't want to talk about it. And basically, I just wanted them to mind their own business because there was nothing they could do to help anyway.
Yeah. Why'd you say that? Why'd you say there was nothing they could do to help?
Because I got it only now and again as a miserable child or at work in my 20s. I just wanted to be on my own and someone had come up and say, I want to help you. Can I help you? And I'm just thinking, just go away. There's nothing you can do. And confiding in the wrong person is only going to make things worse. So I felt I had to keep my troubles to myself at that time. I think I should explain in that I'm the eldest of 5 adopted children. And my adoptive parents had 4 before they had 5, stating the obvious. They always said they wanted 4. And they had 2 boys and 2 girls. And as it happened, there were 2 dark hair and 2 fair hair, just, the luck of the draw. And all of us were basically all right. So you think, what more do they want? And I mean, even at 7, I knew this was going to go wrong. They got a phone call from the adoption agency. Would they take another child? Now, they had actually no desire to take another child. They said they wanted 4, and they got 4, and that was it. But I mean, I don't really know what happened. This is a 7-year-old's memory. But I'd be sent out to play, and I'd sit on the back step and listen in to what was going on. And there were quite a lot of conversations about it, because Mum was from quite a large family. Although both Mum and Dad were one of 3, Mum had more relatives than Dad, or more relatives living nearby anyway. And there were huge discussions, and the overwhelming conclusion everyone came to was, no, you've got enough, you're doing enough. And even as a 7-year-old, I felt it strange, because couples who want to adopt, they approach the agency. If you sit at home and wait for the phone to ring, you'll be waiting a very long time. So even then, I thought there was something wrong. And you see, with adopted dad being a doctor, I just think this child was dumped on us. Anyway, Mum seemed to want him more than anyone else. I mean, as I say, I was a child. I don't really know with Dad. I don't know whether he was as keen as Mum or just went along with it. But it went wrong virtually from the start. This kid had so many problems, difficulty feeding, difficulty settling, screaming all night, and then serious behavior problems. And he didn't, I mean, we played together. And that was the time when we'd go round to friends' houses, or friends would come here and we'd play, or we'd play in the street. He never seemed to get the rules that, you have to take turns. There are rules to the games, and he just caused havoc. And at the time, I held Mum personally responsible for this. Though now, of course, with the benefit of years of hindsight, whereas she played a part, other people played a part as well, and it shouldn't have happened. It just shouldn't have happened, full stop. He was in the wrong place. He needed younger parents with a lot more energy and preferably an army type views of discipline. It didn't work.
No.
He had serious mental health problems, and it was family wrecking behavior. And fortunately for all of us, he got sectioned. He did something that even my parents would not put up with. He had crossed the line big time. And the police were involved, and he went to trial, and he was found unfit to plead, and he was sectioned, and he was out of the way in a secure mental health facility for 6 months, and we all sort of blossomed.
Right.
You've obviously heard of the Bamber family, Jeremy Bamber.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, reading about that, there were so many similarities with our family. The big difference was neither my dad or my 2 other brothers had the slightest interest in guns. I think if we had a gun in the house, none of us would be here. And someone will be sitting
Wow.
talking to you saying, well, there was actually another family that this happened to. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned at the outset about doing, healing, doing things to help you feel better. And you
Yes.
talked about anger. Was there some anger towards your mum for bringing this fifth child into the house that needed more care?
Yes, when she wasn't up to it, and she must have known. And also for not taking advice, in that he went to 3 different schools. He was expelled from one school, and then he went to another junior school, and mum was often called in for his behaviour. And then he went to the secondary school, and mum was called in again, and the headmaster there, who my other brothers think was okay, he had a good reputation, this bloke. He was known for being firm but fair. He suggested that he was so out of hand, he had to be sent away. They were obviously not coping.
Yeah.
And mum wouldn't do it.
No.
And dad wouldn't do it. And I remember, I know this sounds really awful. It isn't as bad as it sounds, though. It was 2 completely different reactions to the same piece of news. And the mum was dreadfully upset and was crying upstairs. And we 4 were all dancing around the dining room table thinking he was going.
Yeah.
Now that just tells you what it was like for us kids. Nobody went to comfort mum. We all, yahoo, he's going, hallelujah. Which I know doesn't sound very nice, but we were kids.
You were kids. We'll forgive you.
Yeah. We wanted rid of him.
Yeah.
He just...
He needed more. He clearly needed more, as you say, more focus. Perhaps somebody...
Oh, he needed far more. You see, Dad's parents lived with us. So there were 9 in the house anyway. And mum had her mother and her sister. They lived round the corner. And the sister had a breakdown and wasn't quite right. And there were 2 of her dad's sisters, 2 elderly maiden aunts. So as well as Dad having a very responsible job, they had 6 old stroke ill people to keep an eye on, plus 4 kids. Now, I was angry with the adoption agency. They didn't do their homework. They were just so keen to dump him on a doctor. I always felt problem solved. And I sort of don't mind mum wanting to give him a chance, but there should have been backup and support.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah. I mean, it's the whole system. It's not just her.
Yeah. And this was, presumably this was late 50s, early 60s, was it?
He was born in 1960.
Yeah.
And he got sectioned, I think, in either 80, 81. So as a teenager, as a top juniors, teenager, early adult, a lot of the time I wanted to be on my own, and I didn't want people coming pestering, cheering me up, because there's no way they could do it. The only thing that would cheer me up is the home to be sorted out, and there's no way a complete stranger could do that. So
yeah,
I became quite solitary.
Yeah. So was there a point where you, when that was gone, that you started looking inside? When he was out of the house, you started looking inside and looking self-reflection.
Yeah, definitely. The first thing I did when I had a clear run was trace my birth mother, and that was huge. That made such a difference, because I now know it was unusual, but I had a brilliant reunion, and I'm still in touch with a couple of my birth family in Australia after 40 years.
Yeah.
That was the first thing I did. The second thing I did was to finish my degree with the OU. I had walked out of college because I couldn't cope anymore and hadn't finished it. So I decided to finish it. So I was doing things for me, things I'd always wanted, but there was so much chaos and drama at home. And even though I'd moved out of home, I always felt responsible. I couldn't leave them for too long in case something happened.
Yeah. Well, I
It
guess
was,
the eldest, there's a feeling of
oh, the eldest girl,
got to do
yes.
that.
And it was such a burden. It really was.
Yeah.
But it was a mixed blessing, you know, because one good thing about being adopted, especially when you're a teenager, is you're not actually related to this lot. They're actually nothing to do with me. It's just a cruel twist of fate that is,
Yeah.
you know, I'm here.
Yeah.
That's all. Yeah.
So you could, was that that was relief at like not being answerable for their dodgy choices, like taking the fifth child on. Is
Yeah,
that?
yes, it was. And I felt, and they probably hadn't meant to, you know, they weren't bad people, but it impacted on all of us
Yeah.
terribly. Before he was sectioned, the six of us were ill one way or another, physically or mentally. I mean, I had IBS and had dreadful eczema, and my brother next to me was the same. He was worse. His skin was like a lobster. Another brother, his diabetes started. My sister, she had, I think, mental health problems. Mum had mental health problems. Dad had, he was quite an active man. He had terrible lumbago and that, which reading up about it is stress anyway. And obviously he wanted to have a clear head to go into work. I just always thought this was never fair on him, you know, because of his job, lives depended on it.
Yeah, as a doctor, yeah. The thing that's coming to me is that perhaps there's an overestimation. We overestimate what we're capable of. So your mum overestimated what she was capable of. She thought she
Well,
could.
yes, but I think there was an element of I'll show you, because so many people said no.
Oh, yeah.
I think there was a little bit of a child in that. And also her mother used to help her a lot with the children. Now, stating the obvious, we're all going to die. And it was all right when Nana was alive because Mum had some support. And she was very much a kid person, my grandmother, on Mum's side. And she was delighted she'd get stuck in with all these kids, and she'd do us costumes for fancy dress and parties and that sort of thing. But she wasn't going to last forever, and things went wrong when Nana died because Mum had to cope with the grief of losing her mother. And they were very close because the dad had been killed in the Second World War. So there's obviously a closeness with a war widow and her children. And she had to cope with that. And she had to cope with Martin, he was called. And us really didn't see why we should help. We did, but grudgingly, we felt it wasn't our problem.
Yeah.
And I also felt, I mean, counselor in training, I think, I was beginning to realize there was enabling. The more we helped her, the longer this would go on. And perhaps if we didn't help her, she would deal with it. That was always in the back of my mind. As a child, I couldn't put it into words, but it was vaguely aware that I could be making this worse.
Yeah. So that was the hope. So listeners, Sue mentioned OU earlier on. That's the Open University. So I'm presuming you were doing some sort of psychology or something that was going to help you in this.
No, I wasn't. It was history. Psychology came later.
That came later, yeah.
That came later, yeah.
And
when I had time to think about it and get my head round it. And another thing that made a big impact on me was that White House Farm story. I think it was then my interest in psychology developed. So how the hell has this happened?
Yeah. So this was you talked about Jeremy Bamber earlier on. So this was dramatized, wasn't it, on UK television?
There's been a lot about it, but I remember now Martin had been sectioned, and then when he'd been sectioned, Dad said there was no way he was coming back. And I traced my birth mother. So I was in a very good place anyway. And I remember driving into work and the news was on, something about adoption and murders and a farm. So I pulled into the next news agents, bought a paper, took it into work with me, stuck it in my locker. I thought I'll read this at lunchtime. So I was eating my butties and reading the paper. And I just, jaw-dropping, I looked at it because the similarity, even the photos of Neville and June Bamber was so like mum and dad, height and build, and reading about the family, the personalities and the mental illness that wasn't dealt with and, it wasn't acknowledged. And the tension and everyone looking at the outside and thinking it was lovely. And I was thinking, Jesus Christ. And I read it about 3 times. And then my colleague, who was on the same lunch break, he looked at me and he said, what on earth are you reading? So I handed him the newspaper and he just flicked through it quickly, handed it back and said, yeah, they're all bonkers. So I thought, well, it hasn't affected you like it's affected me. You probably are not adopted.
Yeah.
But it did happen.
So what had your reunion, what had that done for you?
Oh, it was life-changing. It really was. It had answered so many questions because I'd always wondered, why am I here? Why was I adopted? What's wrong with me? What was wrong with the family? But it was, again, another mixed blessing. But I found I was one of the probably quite a few adoptees who get taken from a difficult situation and eventually end up in one that eventually becomes worse. Yeah. Now, whether adoption just sends them bonkers, I don't know. But just being with my birth mother and, we were so alike, and just hearing their history as well and knowing where they'd come from and everything, it just filled in so many pieces of the jigsaw. And I then felt, I think there's actually nothing wrong with me or with her or with anybody else. We're just people. Okay, my birth mother had made a mistake. I'm the result of an affair. And at the time, she didn't have any option. You see, she did say last time I spoke to her, and she's been long gone, that she's very sorry that she didn't keep me. And my siblings also feel I should have been with them because we're all so alike. I mean, it's this connection with the birth family, but with the adoption family, we've had all sorts of shared experiences. We've all been through hell. And the birth family I don't see very often. But yeah, I'm more alike with them, but I haven't as much to talk to them about. It's a bit strange. But I was just more at peace with it, really, Simon. I'd always wondered, and then I got my answers. And, she, as I say, she made a mistake. I mean, don't we all? But she hadn't made anything like as big a one as my adopted mum had made. So,
yeah.
and although, yes, I would have liked to have stayed with them. I would have liked to be brought up with my brothers and sisters. But the stepfather issue isn't easy. Now, as a counsellor, I used to hear it time and time again. And I wouldn't say it doesn't work, but if it does, everybody's very lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you did after you'd done your history, you went on to do some qualifications in psychology, and then you became a counsellor. Hi, sorry about that, listeners. We had a bit of a glitch with Zoom. So this reading this article about the Bambas, that set you thinking about psychology. Is that right?
It was, yes, and why people behave in various situations. Because up until then, I hadn't known many adoptive people, and I had thought very naively that it was just us having problems and everyone else was living in paradise.
Yeah.
But I had a job a couple of years later as a school attendance officer. And when I was there, we had some training from the school's psychological service of how to handle situations, how to deal with people who are very angry and how to deal with them when they're upset and how to keep yourself safe. And that triggered off an interest. And it was after that, really, I went round to a couple of houses. It happened a couple of times. I'd go round to the house to see why the kid wasn't at school. And 98% of the time, it was just bog standard. Either she'd slipped in or slept in or was giving her mother the run around. Or what happened a lot with absences on Monday is that Dad would have them for the weekend. And then he wouldn't be too fussed about them getting the train to be in school on Monday. Just run-of-the-mill stuff like that. But I went round to one house and was met by a very upset lady and such a tale of woe. And the only thing I could think of doing was offering to make her a cup of tea and just let her talk and talked her through. And then it happened again. And about 9 months, a year or so later, I went round to a house and the mum was in her tears. And I thought, I'm hopelessly out of my depth here, hopelessly. So I started the counsellor training. And with working as a counsellor, you don't just train and are let loose on the unsuspecting public for years and years with no safeguard or anything like that. We had to do 30 hours CPD, continuous professional development, and I went on all sorts of courses with that. You had to choose topics where you wanted to work, and I'd go on courses like that. So it's, been acquired quite slowly, really, my knowledge over a long period of time.
And what's that brought you personally in terms of your own stuff?
Well, now and again, I had to be because I felt my own stuff was coming up.
Yeah.
I was somewhere where I just had to leave the room on one occasion, said, I'm sorry, I feel sick. I'll just have to go out and get some fresh air. It's because my own stuff was coming back. But I've just learned breathing exercises and that sort of thing to keep the lid on it. I mean, I can only feel safe letting it out if it's appropriate. If it's in the middle of someone else's lecture, perhaps not. Perhaps I just have to keep quiet.
Yeah.
But whenever I've been like that during the day, I'll do something physical in the evening. I'll go for a swim or go for a run or dig up something in the garden, give the lawn what for. I've got to get it out physically without with doing some benefit, you know, and without upsetting anyone else.
Yeah.
Snapping at the children doesn't work. It
No.
just makes things worse.
So you've talked about there's two main strands there. As an outsider, as me looking in, it's all that physical stuff, and you'd mentioned the yoga.
Yeah.
You mentioned the yoga earlier on. You've also clearly you've talked about the peace that came to you through reunion and the and the answering of questions that you'd talked about.
It was that, yes. I'd always, it's like what it's described as a jigsaw, isn't it? You have pieces missing, and then some of the pieces went back in.
Yeah. So maybe there's three things as well. Obviously, the third big strand is when you're when you're no longer living under the same roof as Mark. Did you call him Mark?
Martin.
Martin, sorry, that's close. Yeah. So those are the three big strands. The three big strands of your healing stuff, I'd say. Is it?
Absolutely. Martin being sectioned, well, moving away, that was the start of it. Actually, I think I mentioned this before. Before I moved out, I realized I had to move out. I had an alcohol induced. I did something very, very stupid while under the influence. Basically, it was a suicide attempt that failed. And it was after that I thought that I saw the bigger picture. That was before I moved out, but that was what decided me to move out, because I'd stuck around thinking I could help. And then I realized I wasn't helping myself, you know.
Yeah.
I just had to get a grip, or, you know, I felt we just couldn't have 6 people going down for one who was going down anyway.
Yeah.
So that moving out, reunion, the Bamba family, I wasn't so focused on myself that I was as a child. I thought, you know, the world's getting bigger all the time. There's more and more people and more problems. It's not just about me.
Yeah. Because we do that. We tend to, when we're young, this isn't just an adoptee thing. This is a human thing.
It's a teenager thing. Yeah.
We think that it's about us. Do we blame ourselves? I don't know. How would you say that?
No, I don't. I think they did quite well out of me, really, for help and support. I mean, you can always do more, can't you? But I didn't want to be sucked into it. I always wanted that distance between my adoptive parents and my adoptive siblings, especially with Martin. I got on well with all the others, but he was a family wrecking individual, really.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to other relatives after it, you know, years later, and they all say the same thing. You know, their parents had a nice family, and this just wrecked it.
Yeah. And as you said, it was your mum's pride, or I'll show them. Your mum's.
I think so. I think she just wouldn't accept. I mean, 3 head teachers of 3 different schools, all saying the same thing. I mean, come on, Mum, someone's trying to give you a message here.
Yeah.
But it's this willful blindness. And I don't think she was aware of the effect it was having on us. She kept hoping everything would be all right. But I mean, to be fair, I don't think the knowledge was there anyway.
No, I mean, it's a thing that comes up a lot is that we're looking at this stuff here in the 21st century, based on the knowledge we have now. Yeah, and
no, the stuff that happened in 1960, and I'm not sure what it was, to be honest, but it could well have been something like fetal alcohol syndrome.
Yeah.
Now, I always felt the adoption society knew, because why ring up someone who's already got 4 children and the dad is a doctor? Why would you do that unless you knew there was something wrong? And you see, with all this secrecy, I mean, if dad and the GP had had the medical records, they might have been able to do something. But secrecy was such a game then.
Yeah.
That I think they just enjoyed the power, to be honest. And you see, if dad had his medical records, he probably wouldn't have taken him.
Yeah. So there was method to their madness, or method to their
I think they didn't.
Lack of transparency.
Yeah, I think if they didn't tell the parents, in case they didn't take the child, and it was their job to place the children, and there was no support or anything. Oh, this one's off our hands.
Yeah.
I mean, when I got my folder, it said about the Children's Society and that sort of thing. And it said on it something about outcome disposal. I mean, we were just there to be disposed of, given away. There was no, follow-up or interest. You see, now they try, what is it? We were children for parents, but now they try and find the right parents for the children.
Yeah.
And he was the wrong child in the wrong family.
Yeah.
And you see, with not having the medical history as well, it actually can be very dangerous. I mean, it might have been fetal alcohol syndrome. She might have been on drugs or something. It might have been incest. I don't know, but it was something pretty bad.
Pretty bad, yeah. There's something very telling with their word disposal. I don't normally take judgments to people on singular words like that, but that is a summation of what they were up about. They're up against.
Oh, it absolutely summed it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So the moment you talked about, almost taking your life, what that must have been, because you seem like a very strong lady. You must have been a strong kid.
Thank you. Yeah, I have been through a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a moment of madness, really. A lot of things were going wrong. The things at home were just getting worse and worse. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was in a toxic relationship. I was seeing someone who just wasn't doing me any good, and it was beginning to get to me. And I had also very stupidly brought it on my own head by arguing with one of the bosses at work. And I thought I'd got away with it. Now, what happened? I don't know whether he knew, but he said something like, we were arguing, or we were about level pegging. And he said, well, at least I was born in wedlock. Well, that's,
wow.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That lit the fire within. And I said, and a right bastard you turned out to be.
Good line.
And everyone, that's what I thought, yes. And everyone else, laughed. And I think I got some applause as well. And I thought,
I would have applauded you. Yeah. Yeah.
I got summoned into his office the following day and was told in no uncertain terms to take this as a warning. You have a verbal warning, then you have a written warning, then you are dismissed. And this was my verbal warning. And although I was very blasé about it at the time and didn't take it too seriously, I was riding a motorbike at the time, and I was in the serious drinking squad at work. Quite a lot of us used to go out for drinks at lunchtime and after work and that. So there's probably some alcohol in my system. And I just thought on the way home that I didn't want to be here. You know, home was bad. The relationship was bad. Work was bad. At the time, I couldn't see that 2 out of the 3 things I had brought on my own head. You know, I didn't have to see this bloke, and I didn't have to argue with senior management at work. And I just thought I didn't want to be here. I was riding my motorbike and I was getting off at the junction. I mean, I can still see it, to be honest. And there was this lorry, huge lorry, coming round the roundabout. And I just thought, oh, sod it. And instead of braking, I opened the throttle and headed for the lorry. And, you know, I can just see that man's face, even now. Fortunately, it was a very powerful bike. So I just opened the throttle a little bit more and got out of the way. And the lorry driver was honking the horn, and I could hear this for quite a way. And I went round the roundabout and I went heading towards home. I mean, it's very clear even now, and it was, you know, over 40 years ago. I felt like I was in a Tom and Jerry cartoon. Anybody watching would have just seen a girl on a motorbike, but I was having an out-of-body experience. I felt as though I was up looking down, and like Tom and Jerry, the stomach was going like that all the time. And I went along the road feeling very, very strange, and somehow something in my brain told me to look at the speedometer. And I was doing just under 90 miles an hour in a residential area with a 30-mile-an-hour limit.
Wow.
Wow. Talk about making things worse. And that did it. I thought, what the hell? I mean, I was so lucky. First of all, I could have hit the lorry. And it wasn't the driver's fault. He wasn't doing anything wrong, and he'd have had to live with that. Someone could have come out of a side road, or someone had tried to cross the road. It was a residential area. I was just so lucky. Well, my body, my head, and my stomach sort of all came into land, and I slowed down and I just drove home. Boing, 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 boing. And that's, I think, when I started to turn my life around.
Yeah. Big moment. Well, I'm glad you had a powerful motorbike.
Yeah. But that, I think, saved the day. You see, if it wasn't so powerful, I mightn't have got to the lorry anyway. But it just at the last minute, I thought, I can't do that. Opened the throttle a bit more, and there was just enough in the engine to get me out of the way. But it was afterwards, I thought, well, what the hell did that poor bloke think?
Yeah.
I mean, he's done nothing. I can still see the look on his face. We were that close. But it was very close. And then I couldn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed, you know, boing, 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 boing. First thing I'd do was going to get rid of the bike. I'm going to go back into work tomorrow, on time, in correct uniform, being pleasant to everyone, grovel to the manager, you know, put right as much as I can. There were quite a few people I could have should have gone round and apologized to as well. How am I going to get there? Oh, right. Well, the bike has to go. So I got a much smaller one. And then I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. So I dumped him.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to drink so much.
Yeah, big turnaround.
And then with having a smaller bike and not drinking so much, my finances improved. I thought, well, I'm going to move out. I'm going to get a deposit. Those were the days when you could buy a house on a medium salary, not a huge one. You can't now. But I could say I had money put aside and I could save up for a deposit and moved out. So that was life-changing, really. But I realized that although things were bad, I did have people who cared about me. I was sort of visualizing all sorts of visualizing being taken to court and mum and dad watching, and the mortification of being sentenced and them coming to see me in jail and coming collecting me on release day. I thought, I can't do that to them. They don't deserve it. I've got to get a grip and grow up and sort my life out. So I grew up that evening.
You talked at the start of the conversation, you talked about people sharing with people that you were adopted and people weaponizing that against you.
Well, that's what he did.
That's
and that
what he
got
did,
me relating. Now, I don't know how he knew. Maybe it was an inspired guess because I hadn't told anyone at work, but somehow he picked it up. I don't, or maybe it was just a guess. I really don't know, but that lit the fire within.
Yeah.
And because of that, I just didn't want it. Also, I had been a teacher very briefly, and there was a couple of adopted kids, non-related brother and sister at the school. And one particular teacher was quite horrible to the children because it was clear to me that she didn't understand. And I just thought, well, do I say something or don't I? I didn't, but the only thing I thought I could do was raise awareness, mention to other people just casually that so-and-so was bullying this kid I thought she was bullying this kid, and is everything all right, sort of thing. And it seemed to stop, but I didn't, seeing how this child was treated, I didn't want to line myself up for that. I didn't think I could defend her. I think if I said something, it would just make things worse. But I always knew I had to be very careful. It was used a bit at junior school, but not at the secondary school. They far more to worry about than me.
Why do you think that weaponization hurts us so much? Because I felt that.
You felt that?
Yeah.
I think it's because of the ignorance. I think they're showing their ignorance, and because you can't argue with it. I mean, statement of fact, we are adopted and it wasn't our choice. And I think sometimes people tend to attack what they don't understand. There's a lot of anxiety about adoption. I've heard it quite a lot about if you're a bit different, you get treated differently. Yeah. I think it's that people are a bit wary perhaps and feel they have to keep you under control by knowing this thing about you. And you see, it isn't a two-way street. I mean, with friends, if you tell a friend something, the friend will very often confide something in return. You're sharing the confidences, but this is just, well, I've got something I know to use against you, which I found very irritating. And you found it as well.
Yeah, and as you were I didn't have an answer at all for my own question there, right? And as you were thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about what it could be. And this is just a theory at the moment, is it's that somebody else pointing out or inferring or downright saying it, that there's something wrong with us.
Yeah.
It's our biggest fear. You know, it's the elephant in our, it's in the elephant in our room.
Yeah.
And then somebody.
Oh, absolutely. They were good enough to be kept and you weren't. That's how I interpreted it.
Yeah. There's something big there.
There is, isn't there?
Well, elephants are big, so.
Well, that's it. Yes.
So it goes back to a trivial little thing that happened for me this morning when I could see that unless I agree to some extent with the criticism, it doesn't hurt me.
It doesn't hurt you if you
doesn't
agree
hurt
with
me
it.
unless I agree with it on some level. Unless I agree with it on some level.
Well, you're taking away their power, aren't you? If you agree with it, there's nothing to argue about. You agree with it.
You can't. No. Something about them pointing out our biggest fear. Our biggest fear, our biggest insecurity.
Oh, yeah. But you see, we've had a disruption, a pretty major disruption very early on in life, which most people haven't had. I mean, even if the adoptive parents are like birth parents, they're good, bad, or indifferent, you know. But even if your parents aren't wonderful, if you stay in your birth family, at least you know where you've come from. And you've got your medical history and the family history, and you grow up with people who look like you, and certain mannerisms and that go in families. But adopted, you're on your own far too soon, aren't you? Most people leave the nest, whatever it's like, when they are ready. We've been slung out long before we were ready.
It goes back to that point that you made earlier on, about it's just come out of my head. Well, it strikes me it's the pre-verbal, pre-cognitive thing. You're talking about kids taking stuff personally. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So we take stuff personally. So instead of, so we take things personally, and the person, the conclusion that we come up with is that there's something wrong. That's the conclusion for. We've got that question: why was I adopted? There's something wrong with me. That's what the me-focused kid brain.
That's what I always felt. Yeah. Not being good enough.
Yeah. That's why the Thriving Adoptees logo is a diamond. As a direct counter to that. feels like a good place to bring it in, unless you'd like to, there's something else you'd like to share.
No, not really. I mean, I think it's always there. It's always a theme in my life, but it becomes less and less important as time goes on because other things happen in life. I think actually the death of my adopted parents has sort of brought it to an end anyway.
How so?
Well, I don't have to look after them anymore. Don't have to feel responsible and that sort of thing.
Yeah, you were talking a lot about that earlier on, about being the oldest. As the oldest kid,
Yeah.
Responsibility. Oldest of 5. Yeah.
Well, I've never wanted the guilt if anything went wrong and I wasn't there or wasn't nearby. I'm not saying I had to mind them 24/7 or anything, but I was there if I was needed. You know, I'd always like them to be able to get hold of me pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And that never really went away.
No.
Because you see, that's another thing that's part of you. Really, you were there for them. You were there to fix their problems. And although I resented it, I was never been able to get rid of it completely. Because that's your first job, isn't it? A fixer. You fix your birth family situation by going, and then you fix their infertility. You know, you've done quite a bit at a week old, haven't
you?
Yeah.
Wow. Thanks, Sue. Thanks, listeners. We'll speak to you very soon. Okay, bye-bye.